Welcome everyone. I am Amanda Mallon, and this is the Professionalism in the Virtual World webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and this webinar, along with all of the webinars within our virtual summer job search series, are available on our website. So if you weren't able to attend some of the previous webinars, you can still go on our website and view them. So a little bit about our agenda today, and while I go through this, if you could just put in the chat box who is participating. It's always helpful for me to know if you are a student, what is your major, what campus are you from, and what year are you? And if you are an alum or a recent graduate, it's also helpful for me to know that, just so I know who my audience is that I'm speaking with. A little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about you sharing your experiences with this virtual world. We're going to talk a lot about technology use and what should the setting be like? What should your background be like? How should you be presenting yourself? And then we're going to talk about some additional resources that the Career and Professional Development Center can offer you. And then while we go through that, if you could also share, I'm curious what your perspectives are. Do you think that we should interact differently in person versus when we are online using Zoom or Microsoft Teams or another platform? And if so, how? So if you could just share in the chat box a little bit about what do you think, should we interact differently? Should we not? Should it be exactly the same? And then if we should interact differently, what should be different about that? So some people think we should be interacting differently, that when we are in the virtual world, that there's a different way that we should be presenting ourselves. And then other people think that it sounds like really there shouldn't be a difference, that we should be approaching any type of virtual meeting and virtual interaction the same way that we would be approaching it in person. We just have a little bit more of that disconnection between us with the screens. So we're going to talk a little bit about if there are differences, what are they? So I'm going to ask for another input from you. I really want this to be, a participation. I want you to share your experiences. I want you to get as much out of this as you can. And hearing from you is going to make this a great interactive webinar. So I want you each to think of a time when you've had a positive interaction with someone virtually. So think back to your classes from the spring and summer if you took classes. Think back to previous webinars that you participated in, other programs, maybe just a Zoom call that you had with a friend or a family member or a teacher. What stands out to you about the positive experience that you had? And what was it specifically that left the positive impression for you? So what was it about that interaction? Was it something specific that the other person or the group that you were with did during that virtual interaction? Really think about what stands out to you. What are things that we can be doing when we are taking part in some of these virtual meetings and virtual interactions to make sure that everyone is having a positive experience? So someone shared it's a positive experience when everyone has their cameras on. Great, yes. It's so nice to be able to see faces, right? To know that you're not alone in that classroom or in that group. Really seeing that people are there, that they're present, that they're engaged. That's excellent. What else? Okay, great. Someone said that their professor utilized games to quiz them on topics. So it gave them something fun to do as a group, even though they were far apart. Awesome, yes. It's neat how, we're finding more and more ways to be engaging and to use Zoom and Microsoft Teams and some of these platforms to really be engaging. I know I've been in groups where we've done breakout rooms. So instead of a large class, we were able to break out and have smaller group discussions. I know some students really enjoyed that, more of the personal interaction. Sort of like if you're in a classroom and you're breaking up into groups, still being able to do that online. Okay, great. Be thinking about this throughout the presentation. What are some positive experiences that you've had? So then I just want to start with thinking about technology use. So by now you may be more familiar with Zoom and with some of the other platforms that people will be expecting you to use. But if someone is sending you a meeting invite or a classroom invitation and it's a technology that you are not familiar with, if possible, we always recommend downloading that technology if necessary and trying to test it in advance. This way, you're not getting ready for the meeting and then realizing that something's not right on your end, or that that new technology maybe isn't compatible with your computer. Those are all things that you want to be testing out and playing around with in advance, so that way during the actual meeting, you can be prepared, you can sign right in, and everything can go smoothly. With the technology, if there is a platform that you find you have to use a lot and you're not very familiar with it, so I'm going to use Zoom as an example, right? This webinar is over Zoom, and most of your classes, if you are a returning student, are probably going to be via Zoom in the fall if they have an online or hybrid component. That's what many of our instructors will be using. So if you're someone who's not super confident with Zoom, if you don't really feel comfortable navigating it, there are a lot of different tutorials about Zoom or any of the other platforms. So I would encourage you, that's something that you could always take a look at, take a half hour, an hour out of your day or week just to go through some of the introduction tutorials even, just to make yourself a little bit more comfortable with this new technology, especially if it's something that you're going to be using a lot of. Penn State does offer a lot of trainings around these resources, so our office can certainly connect you with some of these trainings if you're not able to find them yourself. For meetings, we do recommend that you sign on a few minutes early when possible. So a lot of people will have it set up so students can meet in advance. They can have a waiting room. So like as an example, when I have my appointments set up for students, they can come in and stay in my waiting room, and then I can see that that student is there and waiting for me. Especially if you are on a virtual interview, that's really important, right? You want to approach the situation the same way you would online as if it was in person. So for interviews, we always tell people show up 5 to 10 minutes early. Ideally, for a virtual interview, you want to sign into the platform 5 to 10 minutes early. Definitely appropriate. So really thinking about your timing and being aware of where should you be, what is the link to the technology platform, making sure that you have that, and then signing on early or certainly on time. We recommend, when possible, using the audio that goes along with the computer or device that you are using. So as an example, when I sign on to Zoom through my laptop, it gives me the option of then also using computer audio through my laptop. We do recommend that because it tends to allow for clearer communication. There are ways that you can use audio through a cell phone or another function. And by all means, if that's what you need to do to get the best out of your meetings, you can do that. But if possible, we recommend trying to use the platform and the device that you're using for that audio. When you are talking, especially if you are in a larger group setting, we do recommend just making sure that everyone can hear you. So confirm that. So as an example, right, at the beginning of this presentation, I asked you to raise your hands just to make sure that you can hear me and that I'm coming in clearly. And that's really important for you to do as well if you're in a classroom setting, or even if it's, a virtual interview one-on-one, you want to make sure that the other person can hear you clearly. If you are in a larger group setting, we do recommend muting yourself when you are not speaking. And that is so, number one, you're muted, right? You're not clearing your throat and coughing maybe while others are talking, but it also eliminates background noise. So sometimes people will have echoes depending on how their Wi-Fi or internet signal is. Sometimes there's just background noise because of the room or the location that they're in. And those are all things that you may not be able to avoid. But if you can mute yourself when you don't need to speak and participate, that can help reduce some of that background noise. As I go through this presentation, please feel free to ask any and all questions that you have. The purpose of this is really to, help you as much as possible. So I do encourage questions throughout, and then I'll certainly be happy to take questions at the end of the presentation as well. So thinking about your setting for your meetings, when possible, you want to try to avoid as many distractions as you can. And I do want to preface this part with, we understand that some things are going to be out of your control, right? You may be in a house with multiple siblings. You may have pets. I myself have 2 dogs, and sometimes they will start barking, and there's not necessarily a lot that I can do to control them, right? So we understand that people have certain situations that while they're working or going to class from home, they may not be able to avoid. So try to find a quiet space within your home or wherever you're logging into the meeting. Try to find a setting where you're not going to be distracted by other people, by other things within your surroundings. If you are in a classroom or on a meeting, on an interview, of course, you should turn off your cell phone or turn it on silent. You don't want that going off. You don't want to be distracted by your cell phone or by any other windows, right? So if you're on your laptop or if you're on an iPad or your cell phone going into a meeting, you should have any other windows minimized. You shouldn't be also, being on Instagram and Twitter while participating in that meeting or class experience. You want to be giving your undivided attention to the meeting or the interaction that you're participating in. Be present, focus on that conversation, and then you can get to your cell phone calls or your text messages or whatnot at a later time. So then thinking about your background. Someone mentioned this earlier, and we do strongly recommend that you turn your cameras on. If you are turning your camera on, though, you do want to think about, okay, what is in your surrounding area? What are other people going to see? And you can YouTube and search Zoom failures, Zoom meetings gone bad, and you will see a lot of different examples of things that we do not recommend that go on in your background. So with that, again, when possible, if you are able to, try to back yourself up to a wall or to a solid background, or just as simple a background as possible. Close the door, put yourself in the corner of a bedroom if you can, or in a room within your house. Try to find a way that you can really avoid any people walking behind you or any distractions going on behind you. With that being said, if you have to sit in the middle of the room, or if you have to sit with open space behind you, try to make sure that it is a clutter-free environment. Clean up that space. Do a test run, right? So turn on your Zoom camera, see yourself, see your background, and see what everyone else in that meeting will be able to see behind you. Is there a pile of clothes on your floor? Is your bed unmade if you're in your room? What are they seeing, and how can you try to make it as neat and as clean of an environment as possible? Definitely something that we really encourage you to be aware of what your surroundings are, and trying to just do as minimal distractions as possible for both yourself and those other participants. So then your presence, I just mentioned this, turn your camera on. Someone else shared this. It really does change the environment of the meeting. So if you are doing a virtual interview, I always tell people if there is a specific reason that you cannot turn your camera on. So whether you do not have a camera within your computer, whether you don't have the bandwidth for the Wi-Fi or internet at your home to be able to use the camera, whatever the reason, we understand there are reasons. You want to share that with an employer prior to the interview if it is a virtual interview. You want to let them know that you will only be able to speak with them, but they won't be able to see you, just to set that expectation. For your classes, I also would recommend sharing that with your instructor. I know many instructors will be strongly recommending that students do turn on their cameras. As someone who teaches and gives a lot of group presentations, it is so much more fun for me, interactive for me. I just enjoy it so much more when I'm able to see the students and participants' faces. So it's really nice to be able to see that nonverbal, those facial reactions, those facial expressions, and really just that your students are engaged and participating throughout the program. So if you are able to turn your camera on, it does make a difference in both the large group and even the one-on-one settings. It's also important that you are dressing for the occasion. And what I mean by that is think of what is the situation, how would you dress for that occasion if it wasn't in person? So if it's an in-person interview, how would you dress? It should be no different now that it's virtual, right? So for an in-person interview, we always recommend that you dress professionally. So typically a full business suit for both men and women. And with that, I would say the same goes if you have a virtual interview. You should be dressing fully professional. We all know that there's these stories, right, with on Zoom, people are only dressing from their tops, the top half of them professionally. Really, we encourage you just to dress fully professional because you never know if you're going to have to stand up during the interview. You might drop something and need to, go down and get that. So you just want to set yourself up for success and really dress fully professional. Going along with that, even if you tend to dress a little bit more casually for classes or for other meetings that maybe you have with a faculty or a staff member on campus. It's okay to dress a little bit more casually, but you still want to make sure that you are presenting yourself professionally. So think about what is on your t-shirt or the top that you have. Is it something that is appropriate? We've heard stories of faculty who have had meetings or been teaching classes, and there have been gentlemen in their bedrooms, not wearing t-shirts. That's not appropriate, right? You're not going to show up on campus without a shirt on. So why would you think that you can attend class like that? You can't, right? So you really want to be thinking about, would I go to campus like this? Is this how I would interact with a faculty member in person? If the answer is no, or if you're even questioning it, then the answer is probably no. And then you want to make sure that you're changing the attire and dressing a little bit more nicer for the occasion. So now I want to move on to thinking about professional communication. So we talked a lot about Zoom, the virtual interactions, and you may be finding that, I'm sure in the past you emailed a lot, but you may be finding that you're using email even more now, or maybe you're using a platform like Microsoft Teams to chat with fellow students for projects, or you're doing quick questions with your supervisor on a position, or someone that you're working with in another role. So when you're using anything like Microsoft Teams or email, it's really important that you're still maintaining professionalism and that you're communicating in a professional manner. So for current students, we do recommend that when possible, you use your Penn State email for all communication with fellow Penn State students, as well as any of your teachers, your faculty, and other Penn State staff members. There are a lot of teachers on campus who will not open emails from students if they do not come from their Penn State email accounts. So sometimes that can be the downfall of using a Gmail or another personal account when emailing Penn State faculty and staff. They may not open that email, or they may not receive it if that email goes to their junk folder. So we do strongly recommend using that Penn State email account. For recent graduates, for alumni, and then for students who may be communicating with employers for internship and job opportunities. You do have the option certainly of using a personal email address. And if that is the case, you want to just make sure that it is also a professional looking email address. So we encourage you to use something similar to your name. So it could be your first name, last name at gmail.com. Last name, first name. You can have initials in there. You could have a couple of numbers in there if your name is, very common and you're not just able to have your name. But you don't want it to be something that is silly or funny or overly fancy. A lot of people will have email addresses that they've had since middle school or high school, and they may no longer be appropriate for communication with employers and other people. So really important that if you don't already have a professional looking personal email address, we definitely recommend that you create one and use that for all of your interactions with employers for internships and full-time jobs if you're not using your Penn State email address. And then this probably goes without saying, but you want to check your email daily. So most of the times for Penn State faculty and staff, if we are trying to get in touch with students, we are going to send them emails to their Penn State accounts. And you want to make sure that you are checking it frequently, because you don't want to miss important updates or announcement about your courses, or about your financial aid, or about the upcoming internship opportunities, right? These are all really important topics. And yes, we understand that you probably get a ton of emails, but it is important that you're able to take some time, sort through those emails, and then actually read the ones that are going to be important related to, your education and your career moving forward. And then, of course, responding to emails promptly. And we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about what is appropriate, ways to be emailing fellow faculty and staff or employers. But you want to make sure that you're not only reading emails, but that you are also responding to them. And with that, I would say the same goes for Microsoft Teams or any type of other platform that you might be using. You want to still be communicating in a professional manner. So even though Teams might be more of a chat feature, you still want to be typing professionally. You don't really want to be using shorthand or anything inappropriate like that. So I'm going to ask for your feedback again. I want you to look at these two emails. And these are emails that I sent to myself. However, they are very real emails. These are examples of how we have had students interact with us in a work environment in the past. And I want you to look at these and just give feedback. What are some things that maybe are wrong with these emails? What are some things that we should change about them? So someone said the subject line. Excellent. The first email has no subject, and then the second email just says, hey. You always want to include a subject and be specific with your subject. How does it relate to the email or the topic of the email? So someone said there's no opening sentence, right? It just jumps right in. What is my work schedule next week? You need to give a little bit more of an introduction or a little bit more of a context to the email. Someone else said, start by saying, hello, Ms. Mallon, and end by signing your name, and that is perfect. You should always address the person that you are emailing. And if it is one of your instructors, you should say, dear Dr. last name, or dear Mr. or Ms. last name if they are not a doctor. You should not be approaching them as a first name unless they've introduced themselves to you that way. So I do go by Amanda. I tell all my students that they can call me Amanda. But until I tell you that, you should really be addressing me as Ms. Mallon. You want to approach in a more professional manner, and then you can backtrack and be a little bit more informal depending on how the person tells you that you can reference them. So that's perfect. Hello, Miss Mallon. Dear, Mr. Mallon. Perfect. End by signing your name? Absolutely, right? So even though my name is up here and it shows who it's coming from, you still want to give context about who you are and why you're writing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about not just signing your name, but also including a signature with a little bit more details about you. And then someone wrote using full words and not just you. And that's in the second email. That's great, right? So it says, did you have anything else I can work on? You want to avoid any type of shorthand, abbreviations, texting language, things like LOL. Those are not appropriate for professional communication. So you really should not be using them in your emails to faculty and staff, or even to fellow students if you're working on them in more of a project or academic environment. The emoji, perfect. So the second email has an emoji in it. Again, that's really not professional communication. So I would encourage you not to be using emojis when you are communicating in a more of a professional manner. So then if we take a look at what is appropriate email etiquette, and you guys really pretty much hit everything on the nail. So we want to have a good subject, right? So this one is titled Marketing Project. The subject is very specific and targeted to the topic of this email. And then I addressed them, hi, Ms. Mallon, and a comma. So then I wrote full sentences. I finished creating the flyers for the program. Please see the attached documents and let me know if you would like me to make any changes. And then I have not only my name at the bottom, but I also wrote a closing. So I used thank you in this example. You could write sincerely. For my work email, I use best. Any of those are appropriate, whatever closing you want to use, and then put your name. And then we do encourage you to also create a signature. And you can create the signature in the settings of your Outlook or Gmail or whatever email account you have. And the settings will allow you to actually create the signature that will then be put at the bottom of every email that you send. And this is a way for you to just give a little bit more information about who you are. So you can put your full name, and then you could put any other information in here that you think is relevant. So you could put that you were at Penn State Abington, class of 2024. You could put your major. If you have a concurrent majors or a minor, you could list all of that. If you have leadership roles on campus, if you're a peer career advisor, that could be in your email signature. So really any of that information that you think is important for people to know about you, you want to put that in your signature. But it just allows me to open the email and I see, okay, this is a student, they're here at Penn State Abington, they're a class of 2024. It gives me a little bit more context about who is communicating with me. And in this email, they have attachments. So, if that's the case, then that's appropriate as well. Finally, I do want to open it up for questions about anything related to, virtual interviews, virtual meetings. If you have had an experience that you're not sure how you should have approached that, or if you've heard of a friend or someone else who's had an experience, feel free to, ask a question about that experience. I really want to, again, make sure that you're getting as much out of this presentation as possible. And while I let you enter any additional questions that you have, I just do want to highlight some of our other resources. So in the Career and Professional Development Center, we are available to meet with you in individual appointments for anything related to help you choose or change your major, explore what you want to do with your major. We can help you identify internship and full-time job opportunities, and then everything from writing a resume and cover letter to perfecting your interviewing skills. So if there is anything that we can do to help, please reach out to us. I did put my email address on the bottom of this page. You are more than welcome to reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to our office to schedule an appointment, whichever you prefer. And then we do have 24/7 career tools on our website, a lot of great resources and information. So if you have not looked at those, I do strongly recommend that you take a look at some of those resources to help with your own personal and professional development. And then finally, if you are a returning student for Penn State Abington, I do encourage you to also go to engage.abington.psu.edu. This is where you will be able to see all of the on-campus events, including the Career and Professional Development Center's events throughout the fall semester. This is also where you can see all of the different student clubs and organizations and get involved throughout campus activities. So we will be having a lot of virtual programs and virtual meetings and events throughout the fall, but we definitely still want you to remain engaged with our campus. Okay, so feel free to continue to ask some questions and I will start to address them. So someone asked, if you are being required to turn your camera on during a class, but you're not able to do so, then how should you approach that? And what I would suggest is for any situation, whether it's a class or another type of meeting, you can talk with that instructor or the person hosting that meeting individually. So if you're comfortable, you can send them an email. You could also send an email and just ask to, speak with them over the phone or through a Zoom meeting without a camera, however you want to speak with them. But people will understand that, we understand there's reasons why some students and alumni or just individuals are unable to use a camera or turn their camera on for certain situations. You just want to share as much as you are comfortable sharing about that with that individual. So if it's a teacher or a person hosting the meeting, I would just encourage you to reach out to them and communicate with them as much about your situation as possible, and they should be willing to work with you and be understanding about that situation. So good question. If there are no other questions, I just want to thank you all for participating today. I really appreciate it. If you do have anything else, please feel free to reach out to either myself or our office. Again, we are just here to support you however we can, and we look forward to hearing from all of you soon. Take care, everyone. Have a great afternoon.